A grand international conference hall in Accra, cameras flashing, flags from over 50 nations waving behind polished desks, and in the center one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, standing alone against a wall of critics. Every seat in that room was filled with presidents, diplomats, journalists, and skeptics. They didn't invite him to praise him. They invited him to break him. But what happened next? What Ibrahim said and did in that hall would silence not just his critics but millions watching around the world. Stay with me till the end, because this story isn't just about one leader. It's about the moment Africa spoke for itself. It was supposed to be a friendly summit, a discussion about partnership and progress. The hall was shining with lights filled with presidents, diplomats, and journalists from around the world. Cameras pointed towards the stage as Captain Ibrahim Traoré took his seat. The atmosphere looked calm, but behind those polite smiles a storm was waiting. Everyone knew this was not going to be a normal event. Western journalists had prepared sharp questions, ready to challenge every word he said. Some leaders whispered, waiting for the young captain to make one mistake they could use against him. The moderator leaned forward with a rehearsed smile and asked, "Captain Traoré, you talk about independence, but many say you are isolating your country. You reject old alliances, yet you form new ones that look the same. Are you truly freeing your people, or just changing their masters?" The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned toward Ibrahim. His calm face gave nothing away. The trap was set. Would he lose control under pressure, or would he turn this trap into his moment of power? The silence in the room was heavy. Cameras zoomed in. Every leader, every journalist waited for Ibrahim's reaction. The question had been asked like a dagger wrapped in a smile. Some expected him to get angry. Others thought he would dodge the question with political language. But Ibrahim didn't move. He slowly placed his hands on the table, looked straight at the moderator, and spoke calmly. "You speak of isolation," he said. "But tell me, when a man breaks his chains, do you call that isolation or freedom?" A faint murmur spread through the crowd. The moderator tried to hide his discomfort. Ibrahim continued, his voice strong but measured. "When we refused unfair contracts, they called us rebels. When we demanded our own resources, they called us ungrateful. But tell me, what kind of friendship is it when one side always takes and the other always bleeds?" The hall began to react. Some clapped softly. Others frowned. The moderator forced a laugh. "Captain, are you saying the international community has exploited you?" he asked. Ibrahim smiled. "I'm saying Africa is not a victim anymore. We are simply asking for the respect every nation deserves." A few journalists exchanged glances. They could feel the shift. The trap was falling apart. Instead of cornering him, the question had opened a door for his truth to spread. Would this confidence last, or would the next question finally break his calm and expose a weakness the world was waiting to see? The moderator straightened his papers, pretending to stay calm, but his voice carried irritation. The first question had failed to shake Ibrahim, so now he decided to hit harder. "Captain," he began, "many reports claim you've silenced opposition leaders, detained critics, and ruled through force. You speak of justice, but where is democracy in your actions?" The crowd came alive again. A few journalists nodded eagerly, ready to capture every word that might turn into a headline. Cameras focused tightly on Ibrahim's face. This was the question they had all been waiting for, the one that could make or break him. Ibrahim leaned slightly toward the microphone. His voice stayed calm. "Democracy?" he repeated. "Do you want democracy that lives only in speeches, or democracy that lives in the hearts of the people?" He paused, then continued slowly. "When I walk through villages, I see mothers walking for miles to find water. I see children sitting on the ground, trying to read without light. And I ask myself, what good is democracy if the people it serves are starving?" The room fell quiet again. A few of the leaders exchanged uncomfortable looks. The moderator tried to interrupt, but Ibrahim raised his hand. "Don't mistake our strength for domination," he said firmly. "We are not silencing the people. We are silencing the corruption that has stolen their voices for decades." The tension had shifted. The same crowd that once waited for him to fall was now hanging on to every word he spoke. A journalist from the back of the hall stood up. His voice was calm but carried a challenge. "Then what do you want, Captain? What is this new Africa you keep talking about? What does your vision truly look like?" The question hung in the air. Cameras turned toward Ibrahim once again. He didn't rush his words. He looked around the hall, at the rows of presidents, ministers, reporters, and students. Then he began to speak slowly and deliberately. "My vision," he said, "is simple. I want an Africa where the wealth of our land feeds our own children before it fuels foreign machines. I want an Africa where a farmer can sell his crops without being robbed by middlemen in suits. I want a continent that doesn't beg for aid while sitting on gold, oil, and diamonds." His voice grew stronger, deeper. "For decades we were told to wait for help, to wait for development, to wait for permission to rise. But no nation became great by waiting. Greatness is built when a people decide they are enough." Some in the audience began to clap quietly. Others just listened, their expressions changing. A few journalists lowered their pens, realizing this wasn't the soundbite they expected. Ibrahim's tone softened. "When a child goes to bed hungry in a land full of riches, that is not destiny. That is theft, and we will not allow it anymore." The applause grew louder now, spreading through the hall. Even those who came to criticize him found themselves nodding in silence. The air had changed. His words were not just answers. They were a promise. Just as the next delegate prepared to speak, a sudden noise broke through the quiet of the hall. A woman's trembling voice echoed from the back rows, raw with pain and emotion. "Captain," she shouted, "my son was lost while serving your cause. He was only 20. Tell me, was it worth it?" The hall froze. Cameras turned. Security guards moved toward her, trying to calm her down, but Ibrahim raised his hand firmly. "Let her speak," he said. "No one silences a mother's pain." He stepped down from the stage, walking slowly through the crowd. The diplomats looked surprised, unsure how to react. The woman stood shaking, her eyes filled with tears. She wore a faded cloth dress, her hands clutching a small picture of a young man in uniform. Ibrahim stopped in front of her. His voice was gentle now. "What was his name?" "Isa," she whispered. "He wanted to be a doctor, but he went on a mission because he believed in you." For a moment, Ibrahim said nothing. Then he placed his hand on her shoulder. "Your son's sacrifice was not in vain," he said quietly. "Every school we build, every field we protect, every child who dreams freely, that is Isa's legacy. He did not fall for a man. He stood for a generation yet to be born." Tears filled the eyes of people across the hall. Even the cameras, still rolling, captured the emotion spreading through the crowd. The woman nodded slowly, clutching her son's photo to her chest. Ibrahim turned to the audience. "Let us remember every Isa who gave his life for our tomorrow," he said. Would this moment of emotion strengthen his message, or would critics twist it into a scene of manipulation and politics? Within minutes of the emotional encounter, the video of Ibrahim comforting the grieving mother began to spread like wildfire. Journalists, guests, and attendees had all recorded the moment on their phones. By the time the summit ended, clips of the exchange were already circulating online, shared, reposted, and translated into dozens of languages. The image of Captain Ibrahim standing before the crying woman, hand on her shoulder, became a symbol overnight. On Twitter, the hashtag #DarisAlives began trending across Africa. Thousands of young people posted pictures of their own brothers, fathers, and friends who had been lost while serving their nations. Each post carried the same message: they didn't fall for nothing. News outlets scrambled to cover the story. Western media called it a powerful but emotional show. Others labeled it a staged performance. But for the people on the ground, it was something far greater. It was a reminder that leadership could still feel human. In villages, people replayed the video on old phones. Mothers cried watching it. Fathers sat in silence, and youth groups organized small rallies to honor those who had served. The speech was no longer just word. It had turned into a movement. Ibrahim didn't release any official statement. He didn't need to. The people were already speaking for him. Artists painted murals of Isa, poets wrote verses about sacrifice, and schools began naming classrooms after local heroes. For the first time in a long while, unity spread not through orders but through emotion. The world was watching. But how would global powers respond to this awakening? Would they try to silence the rising pride of a continent? Or would they finally realize that a new Africa was already finding its voice? Hours had passed since the summit began. The air in the hall was no longer tense, it was charged with emotion. Many faces that once held doubt now showed respect. Even the moderator, who had tried to trap Ibrahim earlier, looked uneasy but silent. As the event drew to a close, a young reporter stood up, holding a trembling microphone. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Captain Traore," he asked, "after everything that has been said today, what do you want the next generation to remember about this day?" The room fell still again. Ibrahim looked around slowly, his gaze sweeping across the audience, leaders, guests, journalists, and students. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Remember this," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "True independence does not start with a flag or a ceremony. It begins the day we stop asking permission to dream." He paused. Every word seemed to sink deeper into the hearts of those listening. "Let the world call us poor, but let our minds remain rich with purpose. Let them say we are small, but let our courage speak louder than their power. The future of Africa will not be written in foreign languages. It will be written by the hands of our children." For a moment, no one moved. Then one person began to clap. Another followed. Soon the entire hall was standing, the applause rolling like thunder. Even the cameras couldn't capture the energy of that moment. It wasn't just respect. It was realization. People were witnessing history. Ibrahim stepped back from the podium, gave a brief salute, and whispered almost to himself, "The chains are gone, and now it's time to walk free." The speech was over, but the echoes of his words had only begun. Would this awakening lead to unity, or to a challenge against those who feared a free Africa? When the summit ended, the world outside was no longer the same. Within hours, clips of Ibrahim's speech flooded social media feeds across Africa. On the streets of Ouagadougou, students played the video on loudspeakers, cheering with pride. Farmers in Mali watched it under trees, nodding silently. In villages across Niger, women shared the clip through WhatsApp, whispering, "Our sons did not fall in vain." The moment had turned into a movement. Across several countries, youth groups began using the hashtag #GearIssaProject, a call to honor the young man whose mother had cried in that hall. Donations started pouring in from citizens, not corporations. Small contributions, sometimes just a few coins, were sent to build schools and clinics in Issa's name. Within a week, murals of Ibrahim and Issa appeared on walls across West Africa. Artists painted them together, the leader and the young hero, symbolizing sacrifice and hope. Ibrahim refused to take credit. When journalists asked about the fund, he simply said, "The future we want won't come from miracles. It will come from memory, remembering who we are." But as hope spread through the people, whispers of fear began in powerful circles. Would the world let this new movement rise or try to crush it before it fully bloomed? Weeks after the summit, the world was still talking. Ibrahim's words had crossed borders, languages, and walls of silence. What began as one man's speech had become the voice of millions. Across Africa, people repeated his final line like a promise. True independence begins when we stop asking permission to dream. In classrooms, teachers quoted him. In marketplaces, elders spoke his name with pride. Even those who once doubted him now felt a shift. Something inside them had awakened. For the first time in years, Africa wasn't waiting for change. It was creating it. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim stood by the window of his office, watching children run with tiny flags in their hands. He smiled softly. The fire had been lit, and it was never going out again. The story had ended, but the revolution had just begun. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this video so the world hears Africa's voice loud and clear. Comment "Africa will rise" if you believe in Ibrahim Traoré's vision of strength, unity, and freedom. Subscribe to Traoré's Rich Africa for more untold stories that reveal the power, pride, and potential of our continent. Your one click keeps this movement alive, and because together, we're not just watching history, we're writing it.